take a moment. If you can't see that, then just open up your own Bible. I'm reading from the New American Standard in case you have that version handy. It'll be easy for you. I'll read Joshua chapter 2. It's a fairly short chapter, and then we will kind of tear it apart, break it down, and see what we can see. So here it is. Then Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim, saying, "Go, view the land, especially Jericho." So they went and came into the house of a harlot, whose name was Rachab, and lodged there. It was told the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land." And the king of Jericho sent word to Rachab, saying, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out the land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. It came about when it was time to shut the gate at dark that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof and hidden them in the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued them on the road to the Jordan, to the fords. And as soon as those who were pursuing them had gone out, they shut the gate. Now, before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, "I know that Yehovah has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how Yehovah dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For Yehovah your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore, please swear to me by Yehovah, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth. And spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." So the men said to her, "Our life for yours, if you do not tell this business of ours. And it shall come about when Yehovah gives us the land that we will deal kindly and faithfully with you." So she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. She said to them, "Go to the hill country so that the pursuers will not happen upon you, and hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then afterward you may go on your way." The men said to her, "We shall be free from this oath to you, which you have made us swear, unless when we come into the land you tie this cord of scarlet thread in the window through which you let us down, and gather to yourself into the house your father and your mother and your brothers and all your father's household. It shall come about that anyone who goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be free. But anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be upon our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be free from the oath which you have made us swear." She said, "According to your words, so be it." So she sent them away, and they departed. And she tied the scarlet cord in the window. They departed and came to the hill country, and remained there for 3 days until the pursuers returned. Now the pursuers had sought them all along the road, but had not found them. Then the 2 men returned and came down from the hill country and crossed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun, and they related to him all that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "Surely Yehovah has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before us." So, that is Joshua chapter 2. Now, I want to, I just noticed something, and I'm just going to bring it up now because I don't even know how I missed it, but probably some of you missed it. I'm going to make a note to myself that, I was reminded when the men were in Rahab's house, and they were saying that the king discovered that they were there, and he said, "Bring out those men." What does that remind you of? Have you heard that before? Excuse me? That is Lot in Sodom, yes. That is something that you want to keep in mind. I don't know how I missed that, but I did. And I think it might be a good idea for further study to take a look at the comparison and contrast with Lot and Sodom and these guys. It's interesting that this is just prior to judgment falling and that someone is about to be rescued. There's some interesting parallels there that I would highly recommend that you take note of that and do a little bit of comparison and contrast. But I jump ahead of myself just because I didn't want to forget it. But I want to first back up and talk just a little bit about the intro to this section, which is sending 2 spies into the land. Now, we know that previously 12 spies had been sent, but there were only 2 this time, and this time they were sent in secretly. I think that the first time that they were sent with the 12 implies secretly. Spies are generally sent in secret. But so why then would there be a textual emphasis on this being a secret? Spies are inherently secret, so why mention secrecy at all? And I think it's not because it is secret from the people who are being spied upon. It's secret from the people who were sending the spies. I think that the spies were kept secret from the people of Israel. I have a suspicion that when Joshua sent these spies, he did not tell anyone that he was doing so. Does anyone have any ideas about why that might be, if it's true?
It didn't go well last time.
Yeah, Angela has said, well, it didn't go well last time, and that is absolutely true. The spies came back to a big group of people. This is the way I picture it in my mind. The text doesn't clearly delineate what happened exactly, but I have in my mind that you see the 12 people coming and a big group of people show up, and it's kind of like a free-for-all where it's like, oh yeah, they just start yakking about what they saw, and all these people are gathering around, most especially the leaders of the tribes, and it's kind of an impromptu gathering where they're just relating what they saw, and pretty soon it turns to negative speech, evil speech about the land. This is not going to work. Terror and fear spread through everybody. So I think that the reason that he kept it secret, or who he was keeping it secret from, was the Israelites themselves, and that he did so in order to show that I think that is a certain amount of wisdom being demonstrated there to compartmentalize information. I think that the compartmentalization of information is important, especially for leaders. I mean, could you imagine what would happen if our own government related to us, all the aliens that are buried in Area 51, and I'm just kidding, I'm making jokes. But no, I mean, seriously, there are things in the government and the way it works and what they're involved in that you just don't want to know. You just don't need to know.
And they don't want us to.
And they don't want us to know. And probably for good reason. I think that everything that you might want to know, I mean, I know that the latest thing is, people saying that the election in America was stolen, that it was all rigged. And that is entirely possible. But my question to you is, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. That's what you're going to do about it.
I think, Kathleen, I think too, the last group of people spread fear, and how many times in the Bible that we have the admonishment, fear not, fear not, and that being that they were going to be led into war, I think they just didn't want fear to be spread throughout people.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's what will happen. Thankfully, These two spies were much more faithful and trusting of God, so that when they show up, they said, this is going to work like a champ. These people are terrified of us. They know we're coming, and they're afraid. And that's good. That's good. That's the word that you want to spread around. But I think, I know that, we know, for example, that we feel, many of us, that, are the end days here? Very likely. How far along, nobody knows for certain. But I know that there are some times when we can get a little wrapped up in the end time stuff, and we can let our fear overtake us. And I think that I have seen people share this information and potential scenarios about how things are going to go down in the end times with their little children. And I have seen that cause tremendous damage. That children having nightmares and feeling like, my life is over, and what do I have to live for? This is all going to end, and I'm like, dude, you do not want to share that type of information with your children. I think what you want to do is you want to say, in a very broad and general sense, this world, this government, this current phase of humanity is not all there is. There's another one coming, and they need to have that hope. They need to have that positive side of it told to them, so that they have that hope, because portraying for them that millions are going to die and that comets are going to fall from the earth and that there's going to be giant earthquakes and that people are going to be killed and murdered, and I was like, war and pestilence and famine. I'm like, do we really want to share that with our children? They're going to be dismayed, and that is an evil report.
Would you show a 5-year-old Frankenstein, the movie? No.
No, I wouldn't show Frankenstein to my 5-year-old. No, I just wouldn't. Yeah, you're right. So I think, this is a perfect example of Joshua saying, you know what, I'm going to compartmentalize this information just in case. I mean, he doesn't know what these two spies are going to show up and say. They might come back and say the exact same thing that those 12 came back and said. But thankfully, they came back this time and had a positive report. And I'm sure that then Joshua, even then, probably was being careful and said, okay, you guys go and sequester yourselves. Don't tell anybody where you've been, and I will hold a press conference. And I will tell everybody what we found. We have 2 reports to come back from some spies, and things are looking good, folks. He might have brought them out and told them, hey, here's your prepared remarks. Make this statement about how great things are going to be. But no, I think there's something to be said about, compartmentalization and having a positive outlook, frankly, overall in general. Tracy?
I may have mentioned this before. I can't remember. I know Mike and I have talked about it, but I think what we're seeing is a shadow picture of the gospel. We know that gospel just means good news, good report.
Yeah.
Instead of that would be an evil report, right?
Right.
So good and evil. So I think that what we're seeing is you're going in, I'm telling you, you can overcome. And they're going in and saying, no, we can't. But the gospel says we can do all things through him, and we are strong enough, and we can take him, because God is with us.
Right.
So I think, and then what's interesting too is that they go in by twos, just like Messiah sent out his disciples to go preach the gospel by twos. I thought that was interesting too. So I think it's a shadow picture of what the gospel message is, and that's kind of what we're seeing here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Good insight. Yeah, I think, and this ties right back into all of those times in chapter 1 where we saw so many admonitions. I think 4 admonitions of be strong, be courageous, be strong, be courageous, be strong, be courageous. It is needful for us to be strong and courageous as we face the return of Yeshua, as we face challenges in life, no matter what time of the history of the earth you're living in. There are always challenges. The latest challenge that we're facing, in America is nothing compared to what many people in many different lands have faced throughout history. Faith and faithfulness and courage and strength are required for them all. And I think that even when times are good and you have nothing to worry about, that can be even more dangerous because you become complacent. So I think, and I have mentioned that on many occasions, that I think, this is a tool that often God uses to shake us from our complacency. That things happen. It's not that He causes it. I think that He removes His hands from the situation a little bit and lets things run amok a little bit because it suits His purposes to do so. I'm going to let men do what is in their hearts to do, and I'm going to remove my restraining influence a little bit, and things are going to get a little bit wacky. The evil are going to be punished and suffer for their deeds, and the righteous are going to have pressure put on them that will cause them to turn to me in prayer and to be more faithful and trusting in me. It all things working together for good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. So I think that everything is, just remember, I will tell you repeatedly, everything is going perfectly according to plan. Just remember that. So, I think also, Tracy mentioned, Yeshua, when He was here on the earth the first time, was sending out disciples in groups of 2 to go and carry forth the message of salvation to people. And I think you may also want to look at, in the book of the Revelation, the quote-unquote spies and 2 witnesses that are sent to the earth just prior to Yeshua coming the second time. Those 2 witnesses, nobody knows who they are, but many speculate that it's, Moses and Elijah, it could be, who knows. But it's something to consider looking at that, the 2 spies sent before the arrival of Yehoshua to invade the land. And in the book of Revelation, you can see these 2 spies, 2 witnesses sent. These spies that are sent here, are they also witnesses? They absolutely are witnesses. They're not just spies. They're witnessing to the truth. And they are sharing the truth with the people that they are coming into contact with.
I mean, and that word spy can be ambiguous in
Yeah.
a certain way.
True.
Is what you
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So, something to keep in mind. There's a couple of very interesting shadow pictures here, and we'll deal with, several more. But I want to take your attention just a little bit further in, this is verse 2, Rahab, it being a whore. Now, I know that it is Jewish tradition many times to indicate that Rahab was not actually a whore, but maybe an innkeeper. It's certainly possible. I mean, that word I think it's Zona. I can't remember I think it's Zona. That has been interpreted as an innkeeper of some type in a few other places. But, that's softening it. But that's because, it is rabbinic tradition. And it's also the tradition in the New Testament to refer to Rahab as a righteous individual who was saved by faith. And I think that there's no question that she is on a journey. She is on a path in that direction. But I don't know that you could say at this point in her life that she is a faithful, righteous individual. It's certainly possible. Angela?
Well, the other story,
Can you come a little bit closer if you don't mind?
the other story you said about Lot, sometimes when it says he was righteous, we have the same reaction.
That's true, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, that both Rahab and Lot are mentioned in the same place in Hebrews. Go ahead, Carla.
Just thinking of what you said regarding how I think sending the 2 spies secretly shows really good leadership on Joshua's part. And, we just got done in chapter 1 hearing about be strong and courageous and observe all the law so that you can have success. And right away we have this story with them being sent and they go to Rahab. to be going to that house. So I was looking some of this up because it bothered me that that's what you would be called. And hey, I'm just saying that it doesn't fit the walk.
Are you let me just ask a question. Are you suggesting, or are you toying with the idea that these two spies were in this house of ill repute and didn't have the purest of intentions?
No, I'm saying they would not do that.
Ah, gotcha.
They would not go to a harlot's house because that would compromise their walk. So they knew better. So I would say she was not a harlot. And so I looked something up, and I would like to just share this.
Please.
So when they call her a harlot, it's really because, okay, she was an innkeeper, and it was a very frequent thing that women were the innkeepers in that culture. And the innkeepers also had people using their inns for harlotry. That was just a common thing. But what was interesting to me is that the innkeepers themselves were called harlots because of what they allowed in their inns. So she could be referred to that because that was something that went on. And for women, that was common at the time.
Yeah.
So I think that makes a lot of sense, given the story we have leading up to this.
I agree. I think that's a good insight, and I wouldn't doubt that for a moment. And some of the historical research that I did reflected a lot of that similar idea to what Carla was just sharing. It was also apparently quite common that these inns, or I want to say it's kind of like a modern bar, a place of drinking and quote unquote fellowship. But apparently in this day that we're reading about in the ancient world, an inn was a hub of political intrigue. And it's kind of funny because I looked back on movies that I've seen in my life where they're happening in like medieval Europe or something, and these warriors go to the inn and they're talking about revolution and spying on doing missions and stuff like that. So that's what I've read, is that these inns of this period is kind of like a tavern bar where a lot of people go. There's lots of secret discussions going on. There are certainly harlots there, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if Rahab is just being referenced as a harlot because that is perhaps her stock in trade, but not personally. So it's possible. It could be that there's something to the rabbinic interpretation that she's not actually a whore or a harlot herself, but that is perhaps her occupation, or that her business is somehow involved in that. That's certainly possible.
Hey, Alan?
Yes, please.
I don't know if you hear me okay.
I can.
I really like what you said, by the way. That's indeed definitely possible, especially with looking at the translation. But from the other hand, I also want to bring up, like Yeshua was always even with with everyone, even like the Gentiles, because doesn't she possibly stand also for the first Gentile?
Yes, I think. Yeah.
In his reign that he adopted, and I wrote that in an email a while ago. But
Yep.
To say that the Torah doesn't allow you to go in if she would have been a harlot, I don't know. Maybe that's true, maybe not. But Yeshua did.
Absolutely. I think that. No. I think you're absolutely right, John, and I think it's possible. For example, I think if you were a person who was called by the Spirit of God to share the gospel with people, that's a place where Yeshua would go, to a bar, to a tavern, to a place where things are happening that are very worldly, because like he said, it is the sick who need a doctor, and he is there to help them. Now, I think that you have to be circumspect and you have to be careful, because you can go into a place like that and interact with people and try to be helpful to them. But if you make it your habit to hang out at a brothel, all the time, it's like this, it's my mission to go and hang out at a bar where they also have prostitution and to minister to people. I would say that's very dangerous, and you could likely get yourself into some trouble. Nevertheless, I digress. Tracy?
A couple things, like just to go with what John was saying, is I can definitely see the spiritual picture because we've got, the red thread and the connection of don't go out of the house, which is like Passover, blood of the Lamb, and they were idolaters, at that point, but Yahweh was redeeming them by the blood of the Lamb, and we've got that picture, that we were idolaters, we were harlots, but we've been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb.
Yeah.
So I can see that could be, but I also question the translation in Hebrews 11:31. Are we thinking that that's a mistranslation? Then if she's not a harlot, because they blatantly call her a harlot in that scripture. So I don't know if you guys have any insight about that translation or not.
No,
I also say it in James too. James, she's also. So.
Yeah.
I'm saying in James, she's also a harlot. So I'm not sure.
Go ahead.
But I mean, the other thing too, did they know that she was? Did they know she was a harlot? Maybe it's just after the fact that when they went there, they found out she was not. You just see a house, you go to a house to find out what's going on, and the person who's writing the story later on says it was a harlot. Maybe they didn't know she was a harlot. I don't know.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. Hold on just one. Hold on just one sec, Kathleen. Hold on just one sec. I want to go to Carla first. She's been waiting patiently, I believe. Go ahead, Carla.
The harlot continually to be called that could be because that was what they commonly called the women innkeepers at that time. So it could still, the tag of that name could be following because that's their culture to do that.
Yeah, I agree. That could be. It could also be that there is a difference of opinion, that some rabbis thought she was not a harlot but an innkeeper, and some thought she was a total hooker. I don't know. It's totally possible.
And just to clarify, like in mine, it says in verse 1 that they went to the house of the harlot. It doesn't even refer to an innkeeper there. So if you're mixing the translations, then you're already assuming she's an innkeeper who's a harlot. So you have to know what you're talking about there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting insight and I didn't look closely enough at the Hebrew translation to see if the adjective of harlotry was attached to the house or to her. That is a possibility, but it doesn't. I don't know. That's a good question. I'm going to go to Kathleen. You still with me, Kathleen? I do not hear anything from Kathleen.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there she is. I can hear.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
I muted myself. Okay. I think as we go on through this chapter, we'll see that the whole story, when we go through 5 and 6, is like a story of redemption with her.
Yeah.
And truly that, we all are, God always refers to harlots we see with the prophets as being, unfaithful to him, the Gentile nations. And so I think we see this real story of redemption and that shadow following as we go through the next few verses here.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I think clearly we see a redemption story going on here with Rahab. Whether she was a proprietor of a whorehouse or a whore herself, she's on a mission. She's on a path of salvation. I think we could just go ahead and say that definitively. Jimmy, are you still there, Jimbo?
Yeah, real quick, Kathleen, I'm thinking
that city. And, because here we have these two guys who, I mean, from a pragmatic point of view, where are you going to stay if you're an Israelite sneaking into the city, planning to destroy it? You've got a limited number of places you can hide out for the night. And, I mean, what better place than, Las Vegas kind of situation?
Sounds like a good idea to me. Yeah, no.
I like the fact that maybe the worst person in town is getting saved. That thematically, I think that works.
Sure.
Mary from Magdala she was a crazy sex worker, demoniac. She was known on the other side of the Mediterranean in Corinth as an international, nut.
An international woman of mystery.
Yeah, she was known in Corinth, which was a really, really rough city. And I just think thematically, Jesus likes reaching out. He's going to start with the worst person in that city.
Sure.
And bring them to salvation.
Yeah.
Maybe that's me.
No, I think that's a good observation.
I just kind of prefer.
No, that's fine. I think that's a good idea. Anybody else have any comments about Rahab, the poor little woman innkeeper? Okay.
It's interesting that she lied to protect the
Are you going
spies.
to talk about her name at all?
Yes, I was going to touch briefly before we move forward on her name and what Michael was just saying about lying in regards to protecting the spies. So, number one, Rahab's name, and I wonder about, this being instructive for us. Now, Rahab's name means wide or expansive, and I don't think it's because she was overweight. I think when you look at the name meaning and you think of wideness, openness, I think of it in this way, which is an expansive, open place in Scripture is often considered a place of safety and security because you are in a wide open place and you can see all around you and there's no enemies surrounding you and you have freedom of movement, expansiveness. So that's all I had to say about that. Tracy, if you want to throw in a little bit regarding Rahab's name, I'd be delighted to hear it.
Yeah, I was just looking at the word that it comes from and how else it's used in the Tanakh. And it seems to be associated with pride, and it makes me think of the broad path, that the people were walking on. And I think the same word is the broad walls of Babylon shall be broken. It's that same word.
Sure.
And so it just makes me think of that. You're walking this way, and that comes in her house, or the one that's committing the sin. I don't think it makes a difference. But that we're all kind of relate to her in that way. That we were walking in that path until we were redeemed and heard the gospel and started walking on a different path.
Sure. No, that's good insight. Angela?
It makes me think if she's a representation of the Gentiles and everyone who was brought into her house was saved, it makes me think that it is a reference to how big that house will be.
Yeah, and I don't know if you could hear Angela. Could you? Yeah? Okay. That's a great observation. And we'll deal with that a little bit more fully in a moment. Michael had mentioned Rahab lying to the king in order to provide safety for the spies. What would you say about that, Michael? What are your...
I don't think she sinned in doing that. I think that what she did was okay because she was protecting life. Had she just ratted them out right there, they would have been outright murdered. Mm-hmm. And she knew that they were men of God and that they were sent. And I don't think that in doing so it counts as bearing false witness. I think that she...
That's a great observation, and that is a difficult. That's a difficult, challenging thing to contemplate. And there's a whole rabbinic study that is called Kol Vomer, which is the study of heavy versus light and weighing commandments. Angela?
I think that is what made, regardless of what her profession was, that's what made her righteous.
Yes, I personally agree that is one of the acts of righteousness that she did. I think the result was of righteous benefit, but I cannot say that lying is ever approved. It is a sin. Lying is a sin, period. It is to protect a life, but is God going to set aside his commands in order to... Yeshua didn't say when he was confronted by the Pharisees regarding plucking heads of grain on the Sabbath, I'm not violating the Sabbath day because he wasn't even probably preserving life. I don't think that it was they were walking and, starving to death. I think what he is telling them is, and he said, haven't you heard that David, got the bread from that Eli, and that wasn't Eli, I don't remember the name of the high priest at the time, but he didn't excuse the guy. And he also said, don't you understand also in another passage where he was talking about the priests doing work on the Sabbath day, that he did say they were guilty of violating the Sabbath day, but it's not held against them. Now, does that obviate the sin? I don't believe that it does. I think that we are always going to be confronted with choices we have to make. There are definitely situations where you might have to violate one of God's commands in order to keep another. I think preserving life is a greater command than lying. And I think that is unfortunately in Christianity, a lot of times people were like, hey, sin is sin, and every type of sin brings death. And there's no question that is true, but not every sin is counted equal. I don't believe that at all. And I think that, when you lie in order to protect life, this is the greater commandment. But you're still violating the commandment to lie. Is she going to be punished for lying? I'm not in charge of who gets punishment, but I do say it's still a sin. Michael?
I was going to say, I've always interpreted not to bear false witness as there being a victim to your false witness, to what you're saying. As if you were in a court of law. If I said, oh yes, I saw that person do that act, and they didn't really do it, I'm causing that person to become a victim because of what I'm testifying. But in doing so, I don't see the victim there because all she did was preserve life.
It's true. It is an act of rebellion against authority.
Yeah.
It's not a good authority, and I don't think she should have done it. But I'm just saying, I don't think that the commandment is set aside just because it's for a good cause. But I would not, under any circumstances, say that she should have turned them over. And I would not agree with that at all. But I do say lying is still a sin. It's just the facts. But we have to weigh these things. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Yeah, I agree. It's still a sin. However, we're faced with those types of choices every day. Mm-hmm. You look at Corrie ten Boom when she lied for the Jews and hid them and lied to the Nazis. Mm-hmm. Was that still a sin? Yes. Did she have to repent of her lying? Of course she did. But I think, when we look at it and their ways, we have to still repent for lying, but it's a heavy light type of thing. Choose which one are you going to choose? You're going to choose the one that preserves life. Yeah. Always.
And I think that comes with having a certain bit of wisdom. And I think that God wants us to do that. I think he wants us to understand his commands in the Torah and to have us have the wisdom that he gives us to be able to discern between the heavy and the light. And in order to save life, a righteous person such as Corrie ten Boom would probably most likely go to God in prayer later and say, Father, I'm sorry for sinning, but I felt like it was the right thing to do. I weighed your commandments and I saw which one was going to result in the greater good. And I think that that's important. Tracy?
I know we've talked about this before, and I'm not trying to stir the pot or anything, but I don't see a command, do not lie. I see the command, do not bear false witness against your neighbor, which is, I couldn't quite hear Michael because the feed was cutting out, so I don't know if he was mentioning that at all, but I think, obviously, we're not supposed to go around lying to people because it's deception. We shouldn't be deceiving people, but I don't think that's what that command is. Like, it sounds like it's more intentionally deceiving kind of thing rather than protecting. So, I mean, that's just my opinion, but...
Yeah, that's kind of my point of view. I was having trouble saying it.
That's Michael's point of view. He shares that point of view. What is that noise?
I have one more thing to say,
Go ahead.
Kathleen. I think that we live in this imperfect world that's fallen. And I think when we have these decisions to make, that's where we see God's grace and mercy abound. When we go to prayer and He says, yeah, I see and we repent, we see the position we were put in. I think that's a total, within the Old Testament, of seeing grace in action.
Yeah.
Alan, can I add something? It's Tammy.
Please do.
I kind of see it like in the Bible it also says do not murder, but we go to war, and if somebody broke into my house and I shot him with my gun, I don't consider that murder.
Right.
And so I see it almost like that. It's not because you killed somebody in self-defense or who was, hurting someone in your family. I don't think so. What now? I got to go to God and say, "Hey, you know what? I'm sorry for murdering," but it's not really considered murder.
No, and I totally agree that that is not murder. Killing someone and murder are two very different things. And I think that a righteous person though might actually shoot an intruder and kill them, and then go to God later on that night and say, "God, I feel terrible that I shot that person. I did not want to shoot that person. Not that I sinned, but I feel bad about it. I didn't want anybody to die. I'm asking you to forgive me for taking a life, but I felt like I did was right." I think that's the best you could come up with. Wayne, go for it, buddy.
There's a time to do this and a time to do that. You always hear this. If you have to lie to save somebody or do something that's gonna benefit somebody, it might be right at the time. But all sin transgressions have consequences, regardless what the reasons for. And there's a scripture that says that there's in Proverbs 6 things the Lord hates, that God hates. But 7 of them are abominations. I'm like, how do you get 7 things out of 6? But 2 of those have to do with lying. He hates lying. It's an abomination.
And I think it's in Proverbs 6. And the other thing, too, is that God is supreme and sovereign. And, sometimes we lie because we want a good outcome. But sometimes if we back away and do the right thing, God will make it right anyway. So it's nice that Rahab did that for these 2 men, but I really believe if she had said something, God would have intervened, because that's what God does sometimes. So that's just my feeling. Sometimes we lie because we lack faith. I lie sometimes because I lack faith. But I think if I had the faith to do the right thing according to God's law all the time, He would intervene and it would go His way anyway.
I think that's not a bad idea. I mean, surely, if we were dealing with a person like, let's say that Rahab was a totally righteous individual who believed in God and just felt very convicted about lying, and she said, I'm just really not comfortable with lying to the authorities, and I'm going to tell the authorities that, yes, the men are here, they're hiding in the flax stalks up on my roof. It could have happened. And bless you, could God have still rescued these 2 spies? Absolutely. He could have made them impervious to death. It might have resulted in even greater glory to God. I don't know. But Rahab, and I think this is a key point, which we'll deal with in just a moment, is she feared the God of the Hebrews more than she feared her king. And that is such a critical component of this story. That is the critical component here. She feared the God of the Hebrews more than she feared her own king and the authority in her own land. She knew very well, I'm certain, that if she had been caught lying to her king, her own life and probably the life of her family would be forfeit for harboring these spies. But she feared the God of Israel more than she feared her own government authorities. That's the critical point.
What I've learned, Alan, is that if I have to hide out, I'm going to Michael's house. You guys are going to turn me in.
I'll lie for you, don't worry.
That's a great observation, Mike. If you're hiding out from the authorities, go to Michael's house. Don't come here.
I got you, don't worry.
I'm just kidding. No, that's funny, but that's a good point. You know where you should go. Hey, now don't think that I wouldn't lie to the authorities to protect you. I'm simply saying I do still think it's a bit of a sin, and however that's going to be dealt with, I have no idea. Nevertheless, I digress. I need to move forward though because we're running a little low on time, and there's a chance I may not even get through this chapter, but. I want to jump forward just a little bit to verse 9 where she basically gives her testimony, where she basically gives her, she's a proclamation of faith, if you want to call it that. She says, I know that Yehovah has given you the land, and all of the inhabitants of the land, their heart is melting, they're faint. I wanted to ask and about your perception of this, and that is this question: Does Rahab have faith in God, or does she fear God? And what is the difference? Angela?
Both.
Well, according to Hebrews, it's faith.
When she protected the spies, she feared God. When she hung that scarlet thread out her window and brought her family in, she had faith that he would save her.
I think that's an interesting insight. Yeah, I think that there are...
Her fear, and then she acted, and then faith came. It was a process.
So Angela's making the case that it's really both, and that maybe fear was the initial motivator, but it quickly transitioned into faith in her actions. I think that's not a bad idea. Was someone want? Oh yes, go ahead. Oh, go, Jim. Hold on, Kathleen. Hold on, just one sec, Kathleen. Jimbo, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's cool that it was a miraculous saving that Rahab had for her whole family. That part of the wall didn't fall down. I think it's pretty cool that these two human beings were able to bind God as His ambassadors and do this thing that only God could do, and he responded.
Yeah, absolutely, good insight, Kathleen.
I really think she started making the switch to faith when we see her hide them under the stalks of flax.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a shadow of actually the Passover, where the flax ripen at the same time the barley does. It's also a sign of the linen that is used to make the priestly robes.
Yep.
And I think that's where she starts putting her trust in the Father.
It's a good point.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, great insight. I think that you're right, Kathleen. In my own opinion, that if it did transition from fear to faith, it probably happened very quickly. I think that she had been experiencing fear about the God of Israel and the Hebrews who were coming across the river pretty soon. I mean, you can't have 2, 3, 4 million people milling around 6 miles away. I mean, Jericho, the site where we know where Jericho is. We're not exactly certain where Shittim is, but at the most, it's like 10 miles. So can you have 2 to 3, 4 million people milling around 10 miles away and you not be aware of it? No, not at all. I think that they were very much aware of it, and they were very fearful. So her fear of Yehovah probably started considerably sooner. It may have been a fear that she had as a child. I mean, we got to consider that this episode with the gods of Egypt being judged and the Red Sea being parted and the world's nation's powerhouse, Egypt, was destroyed 40 years ago. So it's possible that she was raised on stories of this God of the Hebrews who wiped out the most powerful nation on the planet and killed, 1 million people in Egypt on the night of Passover, and then killed another couple 100,000 soldiers in Egypt. I mean, she might have had a fear of Yehovah growing in her since childhood, So it's possible. And then she took action when presented when she came face to face with a couple of ambassadors of this people. That's when she took action. Carla?
Yeah, I think you're right when you talk about her growing up with the knowledge of him. I think for me in verse 11, when she doesn't have to do this, but she acknowledges, she says that Yehovah, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. That tells you she believes.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, it's interesting. You can also do, if you want to, take a note for yourself, you can do a comparison and contrast with other Gentiles who have made very similar proclamations. I'm thinking of Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, when he meets them coming out of Egypt. He makes a similar proclamation when he comes across and he hears the stories about what has happened. He says, "Now I know for sure that your God, Yehovah, is God above and God below." So, interesting parallels to kind of weave through the story of the scriptures when you see, foreigners professing the greatness of Yehovah. I think also when you look at this passage, it really shows that God is faithful to his covenant promises. In fact, if you look in verse 9, it says that she says that our hearts have melted, are faint. They are faint. We are faint. This word is the Hebrew word mug, which first appears in the Song of Moses in Exodus 15:15, and it is used to describe the inhabitants of Canaan melting or fainting away. That is a prophetic utterance by Moshe 40 years previous to that. That very same word, rule of first mention, is right there in Exodus 15:15, and it's specifically about the inhabitants of Canaan melting in fear. It's a fantastic thing, and it also shows the fulfillment of the promises made to the ancestors and to the Israelites leaving Egypt in Exodus 23:27, Deuteronomy 2:25, and 11:25. The irony here is that the Israelites' enemies recognize God's power and greatness even if Israel themselves did not. And this is where we get into Rahab as a prophetic shadow picture of the Messiah Yeshua, going even a little bit deeper, where, for example, if you want to think about it in this way, this is one of those parallels that we've talked about in regards to Joshua and Yeshua, and that is, for example, Joshua went and spied out the land with the 12 spies. He was one of the 2 faithful spies. So he was there 40 years earlier, but he was only there for a short time. Think about that for a moment. Now, 40 years later, he's going back. And he's going to be staying for a longer time. And he is going to be invading the land. He's not just coming for a visit, a short visit. But think about how Rahab, and this is one of those sovereignty of God things that you kind of, it's hard to wrap your mind around, because it says in the book of Exodus when they were leaving that God could have taken them through the way of the Philistines, and they could have been there in 11 days. But he said they would fear, and they would see war, the possibility of war, and they would fear. So he was trying to encourage their hearts. But they feared anyway, and they refused to go in. And so he, quote unquote, rejected that evil generation, and they died in the wilderness. And because of his rejection of them in their faithlessness, it is because of that that salvation came to Rahab and her family. So this is another one of those kind of pictures of Israel kind of being found to be wanting in their faith, and the offer of salvation being made to someone else on the outside. Angela? Rejecting Joshua's report on his first visit to the land, and then because of that, the opportunity is made. And I want to remind you too, and I'll deal with this in just a little bit, that Rahab is not the only example of Gentiles being afraid and standing up and coming to the Israelites and saying, we want to live. It's not the only example. And we'll deal with that in just a moment. Was someone wanting to make a comment there? Okay. So I think that's just another one of the interesting pictures of the Messiah Yeshua in this text, kind of playing around. I believe that I have mentioned to you before, I don't remember when it was, but in verse 10, for example, it says, we have heard that Yehovah dried up the Red Sea when you came out of Egypt, and that what he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. Now, if you look at the Hebrew for that last little phrase, utterly destroyed, you come across that word that we have talked about in the past, which is haram, which is kind of interpreted in different ways, but it has to do with being under the ban, is one way of looking at it. Dedicated to God. These are like things, and you can see this happening in just a couple of chapters ahead, where they go to Jericho and other places, and there's like God says, this is one of those places where you take everything in the city and you burn it completely, destroy it. It is dedicated to me. You're going to make it go up in smoke. It's mine. That means it is dedicated to God. There are other places where he says, kill all the males, sometimes kill the females, sometimes not. Sometimes you can keep the goods, you can loot it, take all the, the goods and the provisions that you found there for yourselves. But there are certain places where God himself says everything needs to be completely destroyed. That is described by this Hebrew word, harem. Sodom and Gomorrah was dedicated to destruction. This is the very definition, and a complete and a correct definition, of holy war. This is what is holy war. What, for example, is Islam considers to be holy war, fighting against the infidels. That's not holy war. This is a pure representation of what is holy war. God says that thing, when you destroy it, when you defeat it, you must destroy it completely. Burn it all up. And this is what she says when she says, I know what you did to the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og. you utterly destroyed them. Hicharamtem. Fascinating concept, which we will deal with a little bit more deeply when we get to the cities of Ai and such like that. We'll take a little bit deeper look at that. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting to see that Hebrew word haram used, the first use, the rule of first mention shows us that it is used in Exodus 22:20, where it actually, God says, anyone who sacrifices to any god beside Yehovah is to be completely destroyed. What do you...
I had a question, but I kind of retracted because you said we'll cover it more later. Do you have an example of a place where he removed the people, then burnt it, as you were referring to?
I don't off the top of my head, but yeah.
But it has happened.
I believe
And it
so.
states it.
I believe so. Well, we'll take a look at it a little bit closer. Yeah. So there are certain places where, I mean, Rahab, for example, is one of the examples. I mean, that's another thing that, most people don't think of is, well, didn't the spies themselves, in offering her salvation, so to speak, because Jericho is one of those places where you're supposed to destroy everything. Everything is destroyed. But Rahab and her whole family, brothers, sisters, and everything that belongs to them, was rescued. How come they didn't because we saw that Achan, I think his name is, he coveted something that should have been destroyed, and him and his whole group got wiped out for coveting what had been dedicated to Yehovah. So why did he get burnt to a crisp and destroyed for lusting after something that was dedicated to God for destruction? But the spies were able to offer salvation to Rahab when she was supposed to be dedicated to destruction.
You got a second, Alan?
I do.
It's like when the Torah got amended another time with the daughters of Zelophehad, where they were not going to have the inheritance. And God made an exception for them and their circumstance. And he amended the Torah. And it's almost like any time salvation is on the line, and if God doesn't do something, there's going to be doom for somebody that maybe doesn't deserve it. The daughters of Zelophehad were going to have no inheritance because there was no son among them to own the land. And here we have another issue of salvation.
I like what you're saying there, Jimbo. I do. I think that that's not a bad idea at all. That it really does demonstrate the compassion and the caring of our God, who is desirous that people be rescued, and that anyone who is willing to call upon the name of Yehovah will be rescued. So I think, it's a good observation. Anybody else? Go ahead, Carla.
Just a question. So, at the time that this was happening, this was before they, obviously took Jericho, but was it already labeled as something to be under the ban?
That's a great question. In the text, no. According to the text, those instructions to the Israelites about this place being under the ban don't come until later. The rabbis actually struggled with this concept because they believed that Joshua did know in advance, and that perhaps the spies knew in advance, but they did this anyway. Now, of course, they have a fanciful interpretation, which is to say that Rahab, when she made this confession and helped the spies, she essentially was not a Canaanite anymore. She had become grafted into Israel and became kind of like an Israelite. She converted, so to speak. And I don't say that that's not a bad idea. I think, when she confessed with her mouth, your God is God above and below, and, He's in charge. It's a confession of faith, and I think, could she be considered an Israelite at that time? Absolutely. I think she could be considered to be grafted into Israel at that time, and therefore perhaps not under the ban. Tracy?
Kind of reminds me of how Messiah's walk in and that Gentile woman comes up and asks for some help, and he's like, "It's not right for me to help you."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm paraphrasing, and she makes this proclamation that to him he recognized as brave faith, and because of that proclamation, it was as she requested. So I just look at this as these are the things that people don't see because they don't know our God.
Right.
They don't know the Old Testament God is merciful.
Right.
They think he's vengeful and mean, but it's because those things are hidden to only people that get to know him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what this is. I will have mercy on who I will have mercy upon. And I just think that's an example of what we're seeing here.
Yeah. Agreed. Absolutely. Somebody else want to talk there? Oh, Marie?
That's me.
Oh, Wayne?
Yeah. The concept of being rewarded for treating God's children, in a good way, like what Jim was talking about, and this whole thing that whatever you do for the least of these, you've done for me. So even though we see that as a New Testament concept, that when Yeshua is saying that in Revelation, these people from antiquity, I believe, knew of that concept. Mm-hmm. That if you treat somebody well, like you treat somebody that is a child of Yahweh, and the drink of water, if you give this person a drink of water, so you won't lose your reward. So just those little things, hospitality basically, and treating people right, even when you don't know that you're treating a child of God or somebody that's following Yahweh. So you get that reward.
Yep, absolutely. Good observation. I think I want to have you take a look at this. There's this section here with verses 15 through 21, which really drew my attention because there are several interesting things that are happening in this section. In verses 15 through 21, and I just wanted to bring your attention to these things. Number one is that we do have here 3 conditions for salvation for her and her family that are laid down by the 2 spies. They say to her that you must, number 1, mark your house secretly, obviously. Number 2, you must gather your family to the place that we have designated. And number 3, you must keep this mission a secret. Now, I think that those 3 things are certainly interesting. I think that you could extrapolate from those 3 things and kind of maybe see some hidden wisdom there. Marking your house secretly is one of the most interesting ones. Then we get into discussions about the scarlet in the window and this cord. It is certainly, somebody mentioned this previously, that it certainly is reminiscent of the Exodus from Egypt, where we had blood on the door, and salvation came to that house because there was blood on the door. Here we have a scarlet cord in the window. There's definitely some correlation there, that salvation is going to be offered to this house because there's something red on one of the portals to get into it. So that's an interesting observation. Gathering your family, this is again reminding me of Lot in Sodom, because the angels, the 2 angels who came to Lot said, I believe, is there anyone else here that you need to have with you? And of course, Lot went around and tried to get his sons-in-law apparently to come, but they thought he was joking. It did not work out. He was not able to find anybody in the city who was willing to be saved, so to speak. And we don't know, frankly, I don't believe there might be a reference to this passage, to this episode a little bit later. We do hear in the New Testament that Rahab does marry a guy named Salmon or Solomon, who was an ancestor of Yeshua. She became one of the ancestors of Yeshua, but we don't know how many of her family members actually came to the house and were rescued. But we do know that she, in all likelihood, went around and tried to find anyone from her father's house, maybe friends, family, anybody, come to my house. She's got to be careful here because she needs to keep the mission a secret, and there's probably some hidden wisdom there, because generally speaking, we think about, going on a mission field and witnessing to people. That's not something you keep secret. But I don't know. It's an interesting play here that's going on. But she has to go out and get people into her house, but she has to do it secretly. So maybe she just said, "Hey, we're throwing a big party. You absolutely must be in my house on this, on this time, on this day." I don't know how that's going to work out, but it's certainly interesting. Tracy?
I just wanted to point out something that's kind of neat connecting the Exodus to this is how in verse 12 Rahab asks that he gives her a true sign or a sign of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And in verse 18 it says, "We're going to come into the land, you shall bind the scarlet thread of the line in the window by which you let us down." And when you go back to Exodus 12:13 and then 22 through 23, it's called, "This blood shall be a sign," the same Hebrew word, "upon your houses, and when I see it, the blood I'll pass over you." So I think there's a connection there with this blood being the sign, and really that the blood of Messiah on our spiritual doorpost is also a sign that the wrath of God will pass over us.
Right. Absolutely. That's a great observation. I think it's also instructive when you look at we know that there's couple of interesting words here. One of them is scarlet, shani. I wondered in my own mind as I looked through this whether shani had some relation to shanetz. I did not find any. And I think that the Hebrew letters that form these words are slightly different. It just sounded similar, but probably just in English. I'm not really sure. But the cord itself is the Hebrew word tikva. You've heard that word before, right? The national anthem of Israel is Hatikva. What is Hatikva? You ever heard that word or that song? Tikva means hope. Hatikva, the national anthem of Israel, is the hope. This word for cord is also translated as hope. And I think that is highly instructive. This cord...
The Messiah is the Israel.
What was that?
The Messiah is the hope of Israel.
Absolutely. So I think you're seeing another amazing picture here at this scarlet cord that is coming out this window. This is the cord of hope. It's fascinating, and it's also scarlet, which I think you want to look a little bit deeper into that. John, did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, thanks. Impressive that you see it. And there is also somewhere in I don't remember where it was, like when the cord is broke, and what was it, like at the cistern? It was a very, very weird one.
Yeah. I think you're talking about one of the writings of Solomon, which is the cord of many strands, and that is a reference to. I believe that's a reference to aging. There's some.
No, sorry, Alan.
Yes.
I think it is. What is it, like silver cords?
The silver cord is broken, right?
Or is that something totally different? Even though, of course, it is not red or not scarlet.
Well,
the cord in general relates to something different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't remember exactly where that is, but I'm thinking it's one of the writings of Solomon, one of the wisdom writings of Solomon. I think it's one in the Proverbs, maybe, or maybe in Ecclesiastes.
Yeah. There's a 3-strand cord. It's not easily broke.
Okay, yeah.
Let's see, 12:6. Yep, you're right. You're right.
Where was it?
Ecclesiastes.
Okay, Ecclesiastes. Yes. That's very interesting, and I think what that whole passage there, and this is awesome to look into. That whole passage there in Ecclesiastes is talking about the aging process, the grinding stones, standing still. It's a fascinating metaphor, an allegory of the aging process, which is just amazing. But yeah, that's a good insight. But this cord idea is certainly woven throughout Scripture, and the scarlet is as well. I'm going to put something up on the screen for you so that you can kind of take a look at it. Let me see if I've got this. Yeah, here we go. So if you have an opportunity, you can take a look at this. This scarlet thread is woven throughout the Bible, and it pops up in the most unusual places, and it's instructive, I think, and I'll leave it up for a moment so that you can kind of take a note if you like. The first time that we see this scarlet thread is on the arm of Zerach, which was one of the children who was born of Judah and Tamar in Genesis 38. Then this scarlet thread is woven into the fabric and the curtain of the Mishkan in Exodus 26:1 and 36:35. It is part of the high priest's garments in Exodus 39. It's used in the red heifer ceremony in Leviticus 14. It is here used to save the life of Rahab. And in the Song of Solomon, it is used to describe the lips of the bride. It's a fascinating, the way that this scarlet thread is woven throughout Scripture is just stunning. So you might take note of that and look at, just looking at these things here and what they're referencing. Do you see anything that's tying them together in some way? Do you see a common element or a common theme that is kind of weaving all of these things together?
Redemption, like with the priest, the heifer, Rahab?
Yes, I think if you were to you can never go wrong if you answer every question in the Bible with Jesus. So, so I'm serious. I think that this is, this is Zerach and Peretz, the two, boys that were born of Judah. Each of them is some type of an interesting shadow picture of the Messiah, where this child Zerach comes out of the womb, and the midwife or whatever ties this scarlet thread onto his hand, but then he pulls it back in, and some other kid comes out. I think that's another picture of the Messiah Yeshua coming forth into the world, but only briefly and only partially, and then withdrawing. And then coming out, ta-da, here I am. So we have a picture of the Messiah Yeshua in the twins of Tamar and Judah, woven into the fabric and the curtain of the Mishkan. That's talking to me about holiness and about the redemptive process, is certainly the high priest's garments. We're talking about ceremonial cleansing, ritual impurity with the red heifer, saving life, the lips of the bride. All of these things really talk to me about redemption, salvation, and especially the Messiah Yeshua. The Messiah Yeshua is just embedded in all of this in very interesting ways. So that's just an interesting observation that I wanted to show you. Tracy?
I just want to thank you for pointing out that Solomon verse, because it kind of clicked something in my head. So that Song of Solomon, your lips are like a thread of scarlet, and your speech is comely. That reminds me of Proverbs 31:36, which is talking about the virtuous bride. So she's got scarlet thread as this mouth, and what's coming out of the mouth is she opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the Torah of kindness. So I just think that that's like a really cool picture of how the Messiah and the Word, it's all one.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just thought that was really neat.
It is absolutely fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I'm going to throw out just just two other things real quick, and then I'm gonna wrap up. It's getting a little bit late. I apologize for keeping you. Number one is you might make a note to yourself to compare and contrast the response of the people of Nineveh in Jonah's day to how these people responded. The people in Jonah's day were warned by Jonah specifically 40 days of repentance, and Jehovah will bring destruction. Someone's there speaking, judgment is coming, repent. In this example, we have 40 years where the people know what's coming. No one comes specifically to tell them about it, but they know it nonetheless. That's an interesting thing. I just throw that out there for your continued study, perhaps. And then one other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is promises that are extracted under threat. This is not this is, like I said, this is not the first time that a Gentile, a foreigner, comes cringing to the Israelites and says, we want to live. That happens again in just a little while. And a promise is extracted of salvation, but under less than ideal circumstances. It appears to me that Rahab, and it's certainly possible to me, I actually envisioned this in my mind, that there might have been people from Canaan who were fleeing Canaan to the Israelites. I mean, why not? If you have a heart like Rahab does, and she might just be a prime example, and so we don't have other stories of people doing this, maybe the biblical authors said, God decided to use the story of Rahab as an example of this. It's certainly possible that other people in Jericho knew what was coming and decided to flee Jericho on their own and go and cross that river and throw themselves down at the feet of the Israelites and say, we know that you are coming to kill us and we do not want to die. Tell us what we have to do. It's certainly possible.
We believe in your Lord.
We believe in your God. Your God is obviously something we've never seen before. It's certainly possible that they could have made that confession and they could have stepped forward. Rahab herself could have. She certainly seems like a person of faith. She could have talked to her family and said, I'm getting out of here. I'm leaving. But the way it happens in this story is that she kind of has these two spies over a barrel. She extracts a promise from them and says, essentially, without saying it, I won't turn you over to the cops if you'll promise to rescue me and my family. And they say, okay, this is how it's going to happen. There's another group of people that come to Joshua in just another couple of chapters who basically say the same thing, and there's a little bit of trickery. Salvation is extracted, but not in a forthright way. It's just an interesting concept, and I want you to consider it because we'll be coming across this again, and perhaps next time we will deal with it a little bit more fully. That's all we have time for.